The epilogue at the end of Red Dead Redemption 2 is easily one of the game's most criticised sequences, and it's not hard to understand why. Coming straight off the back of an action-packed, heartbreaking climax of the main story, the game does an absolute bootleg turn into a much slower, subtler story. And so I understand how that isn't exciting or engaging for a lot of people. It's not lost on me why it's as divisive as it is. And because of the fact that it is somewhat polarising, I don't think it gets talked about nearly enough for what it actually is. We've talked endlessly about Arthur Morgan and Dutch van der Linde and how amazing those characters are, and rightfully so. I am obviously guilty of doing that. But John Marston has kind of gotten brushed to the wayside in these conversations, to the point that people genuinely get resentful about having to play as John in the epilogue because of how much they miss Arthur. And I think the people who complain most about the epilogue, saying it's boring or tedious or that it takes too long, are kind of missing the point as to why it's so necessary. Not just obviously to John's story, but Arthur's as well. Those people that just put the game down after this moment are robbing themselves of a really moving part of the story that is just as touching as the main game, and serves to tie up the story in such a terrifically satisfying way that it might actually end up being the best part of Red Dead Redemption 2. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the story prior to the epilogue, so forgive me if I speed run through it just a little bit, but it does contain some pretty crucial context that make the epilogue as effective as it is. So with that being said, let's start at the beginning of RDR 2, in which John Marston, if I'm being honest, is kind of a piece of shit. He's selfish, blunt, and uncaring towards his family. Prior to the events of the game, he'd abandoned them for over a year, and even after he returns, he's still incredibly cold and distant. He demonstrates absolutely zero interest in building a relationship with Jack, and most of his exchanges with Abigail are heated or bitter. He's far more concerned about fulfilling his role as a gang member than his responsibility as a father, which is a major point of contention between Arthur and John in the beginning of the story. Arthur, having once had a son of his own, means that he is understandably frustrated that John would be so unappreciative and neglectful of his new family, and particularly with Jack, that John would just so carelessly throw away something Arthur might kill to have back. But for John, he's an outlaw, and a young, hot-headed one at that. A hardened criminal accustomed to a life of violence and bloodshed. He hasn't really matured to have a gentler side to him yet, and I think he sees Abigail and Jack as an inconvenience more than anything. Or perhaps he just feels unready and unequipped to facing the challenges of being a family man. That isn't to say that he doesn't love Abigail or feel a deep responsibility towards Jack, because it's for both of those reasons that he even returned in the first place. But it just seems as though he doesn't really know how to juggle these two different lives. Being that he's a hardened outlaw, having deep, vulnerable, sincere relationships isn't exactly in his bag of tricks or comfort zone, and it's for that reason that he maintains his distant, cold shoulder attitude towards his family all the way through the first 3 chapters of the game.
Have you seen that boy, Jack?
No.
Where's my goddamn son? Where is he? Where's my son? They took him, didn't they? They took my son.
Much like this is Arthur's turning point, this is most certainly John's.
If I don't get that boy back safe, she'll kill us all.
I know.
Jack, an innocent 4-year-old boy, is kidnapped as retaliation for crimes his father was involved in. And I know the Braithwaites doing this was far more about acting against the van der Linde gang as a whole than it was about John specifically, but obviously that doesn't make John feel any less guilty that Jack is now having to pay for wrongdoings that he's too young to even understand. And John feels enormously responsible and anxious about what might happen to him. This is the point in which John really feels the weight of his mistakes for the first time. That his responsibility, first and foremost, whether he likes it or not, should be to his family. But the issue is that being one of the longest tenured members of the gang, all his personality and values have been about loyalty, community, and responsibility to the gang specifically. And doing what's best for his family might involve going against those values. It might involve betraying the gang and the man who raised him. And that's a really hard decision to square, because he still loves Dutch even if his faith in him is beginning to diminish. Also, being an outlaw all his life, he doesn't really know how he'd provide for Abigail and Jack in any other way, making the prospect of running away with them even more daunting.
Soon, you gotta go. Go. Don't look back.
I'll think about it.
I've done a lot of thinking. Look at us. Out here risking our necks, and for what exactly? For an idea that don't work no more.
How you mean?
You know just what I mean. You got a family. You need cash. You need to start building a life for yourself.
I don't know, Arthur.
Nor do I. But I'm seeing things a lot more clearly now. I wish things were different. But it weren't us who changed.
It's clear that John still has reservations about running away, but after this conversation, he clearly knows what he has to do. It's obvious that the end of the Van der Linde gang is nearing closer and closer, and out of all the gang's members, Arthur makes it clear that John easily has the most to live for. And so when the gang finally collapses, the most important thing is that John and his family are not casualties of it doing so, an idea that Arthur would die in the name of.
All right, Arthur, come on, let's go.
You go.
Keep pushing, Arthur.
No. No. I think I've pushed all I can.
Come on.
You go.
We ain't got time for this, not now.
We ain't both gonna make it. Go. Now. I'll hold them off. It would mean a lot to me. Please. Ain't no more time for talk. Go.
Arthur.
Go to your family.
Arthur!
Get the hell out of here and be a goddamn man.
You're my brother.
I know. I know.
Sacrificing himself to enable the Marsden family's escape is not only the defining moment in Arthur's redemption, but also deeply interconnected with John's story of redemption, being the catalyst that enables it. So all of his actions after this moment are underscored by Arthur's sacrifice, and he knows as much as anybody that he has to commit to making good on this second chance for it to mean anything at all. But starting a whole new life, becoming a whole different person, that isn't something that would come naturally to any of us, and it's something that John continues to struggle with even years later.
We brought that trouble on ourselves.
By we, you mean me.
The one me who went and shot him.
Seemed like he deserved shooting.
I'm sure he did. But I've been thinking, ain't it about time you stop being the man making them decisions?
I'm trying.
Are you?
I think so.
We gotta find someplace to lay low. Keep quiet.
Maybe Dutch was right. Maybe we should have just gone to Tahiti.
Is that it with you? Tahiti or killing? Come on, John. Please, try.
Try what?
We gotta live somewhere for more than just a few weeks.
Okay. Let's see what we can find in Strawberry. What do you know about Strawberry?
I know they like good, honest, hard-working men a whole lot more than angry killers. So make yourself good and honest.
I'm always honest. Maybe not always good, but I'm always honest.
My whole life I've been surrounded by fools with moral codes. Here's the moral code. Look out for folks. Stop trying to act like some hero in a book.
What do you know about heroes and books?
My reading's getting pretty good.
We'll read different books then.
As I said in the beginning, I understand why people are impatient with this last chapter. The first 2 or 3 hours of it are really slow, and it consists of mostly just mundane manual labour. And your reward for doing it isn't money or cool unlocks or exciting moments of gameplay. It's just the cutscenes in which these little victories, like getting a job or moving into their cabin at Pronghorn, or John simply turning in after a hard day's work, how happy that makes Abigail. And because that's enough of a reward for John, it's enough for us as well. Rockstar knows that you care enough about these characters, that you care enough about what Arthur died for, to know that you don't need any extra incentive to carry on through the epilogue, despite it not being particularly action-packed or exciting. That's an incredible amount of faith they have in their video game characters. And what's another clever choice by Rockstar is that John's not pretending to like it either. John's with the player on this. He doesn't relish the prospect of having to engage in some of the work he's been doing and isn't 100% sure whether he's going to be able to change his ways.
Ain't no rancher. Rustled horses, not raised them. Stole cattle, not birthed them.
And yet, he's persevering through it and he's trying his best anyway. It's what makes him such a relatable and endearing character, especially at this particular point in his story. I also like that we get little moments that suggest that Abigail and Jack are also struggling to adapt in the same way John is from time to time, such as that Abigail has clearly yet to master the art of home cooking.
Anybody want some more?
No, I'm
thank
good.
you.
I miss Mr. Pearson.
John Marston, you're such a pig.
This shows us that adapting to an entirely new situation is going to present challenges for everyone, not just John. And so he isn't any less of a man for not having it all figured out right away. However, while his heart might be in the right place, he has a pretty warped understanding of how to do the right thing and still has a horrendous knack for getting into trouble. And I know there's a decent case to be made that trouble finds him a lot more often than he's out there looking for it, but it's also equally true that in many of these situations, he simply can't swallow his pride enough to leave well enough alone.
Oh, Fancy Pants Getty's paying you to be tough for him, huh?
No, he's paying me to keep the place clean.
Oh.
Said he had some problems with vermin.
And this is a consistent point of tension between Abigail and John throughout the epilogue. And I understand that there's probably a lot of players out there that just think Abigail is giving him a hard time and that none of these hostile situations are his fault, and therefore he's justified to act in self-defense. And to those people, respectfully, I think you might be missing the point the story is trying to make. That idea that none of these scenarios are his fault, that's what John is trying to explain to Abigail, but the point is that he's not really hearing what she's trying to explain to him. John feels a lot more comfortable in a shootout than he does in a hay shed, and so it's not a coincidence that he finds himself in so many violent situations. For example, the mission in which the Laramie boys steal Mr. Geddes' cattle.
Let me in, it's me.
What was it?
Mr. Geddes' cattle was taken.
I'm sorry to hear that. What are you doing in that thing?
Mr. Geddes been real good to us.
What are you doing?
My job, Abigail. My goddamn job.
John doesn't hesitate for a second when presented with an opportunity to put himself in a firefight. But the issue is that his responsibility to Abigail and Jack is way more important than his responsibility to Mr. Geddes' cattle, no matter how much he might feel like he owes Mr. Geddes. His job, first and foremost, is to protect his family. And leaving Abigail and Jack by themselves undefended on a ranch that was just attacked by bandits, that is a failing of John as a husband and as a father. And he can't see that yet, because even when he returns, this is his response.
What? What? What choice did I have? Just answer me that. What was I supposed to do?
This is also another genius move on Rockstar's part, because our inclination as a player to want to go and shoot and blow stuff up works against John in the narrative, because he has the same inclination as we do to want to let loose after doing so much mundane, boring work. The idea of ludonarrative dissonance, there being a disconnect between the gameplay and the story, is not an issue here, and I think that's one of the reasons so many players take John's side of the argument here, is because we as the players are also thinking, for the love of God, just let me shoot someone. But getting back to John, he seems to think that as long as his intentions are good, then violence is surely justified and permitted. But that is the lie the Vanderling gang told themselves for so many years, and Abigail's trying to point out that John will end up in the same hole they did if he can't straighten himself out.
I was reading the newspaper. I was reading about a old ranch, Beecher's Hope, down by Blackwater.
Was you?
Well, Jack read it to me, but I thought maybe we could raise some money. Bank could lend us the rest. We could be happy, John.
Bank loans? I got a goddamn price on my head, woman.
I know all about that. Every time we about to get somewhere, make something, you go and show the entire world that you ain't Jimmy Milton. Every place we've been has been the same. We start doing okay and then boom, you act like the big man with the gun. Tired, John, and I guess I was dreaming a little. At least give me that.
Just feels hopeless.
You're doing better.
All this culminates in a confrontation between John and a handful of thugs that work out who he is. But this time, he's not out somewhere far away putting himself in harm's way. This time Jack is right there with him with bullets flying over his head. And once again, I can already sense the comments of players defending John in this particular scenario. But if you listen to the dialogue in this scene, the guy attacking John isn't a lawman or a bounty hunter. He's the brother of a man John killed months prior. And John claims that he only did so because he was being robbed, but the point is that violence is cyclical. Violence begets violence even if it's well-intended or in self-defense, and an act of it can still have consequence even months or years down the track. And this is how John puts Abigail, and in this case, Jack, at risk every time he gets his hands dirty.
Darling John, a kind lady in the village helped me write this.
She had men problems of her own, but that's a different story. Listen, I have begged you, but it don't seem to make much difference. I've tried everything I know to make you grow up. And you know I love you, but loving you means I can't watch you do this. Time after time, we've had to run because of your behavior and your decisions. We got a son. I got a son. And I love our son enough that I can't have him around while you're like this. I had so many dreams, John. I hoped you would change. We all saw what happened to them that didn't, but you... Part of you is hell-bent on ending up the same way.
And I love you too much to watch that no more. Abigail.
I love the idea that as much as Arthur has given him a second chance, he's still got to be a good enough man to deserve it. And so if he wants Abigail back, he has to be humble in the wake of his mistakes and truly change. And it's clear that after letting Abigail and Jack down time after time, he's not even really sure whether or not that change is something that's even possible for him. God knows he's been trying. But what's moving is that no matter how slim the chances are, that doesn't deter him for a second. He's going to try his best anyway, and he gets right back to work.
What's the problem, Milton?
Sorry for the disturbance, sir.
Oh, no problem. My wife, she just began her morning discourse on the subject of my faults. Experience I think every man can relate to.
In some ways, my wife also has issues with some of the decisions I've made. Real issues. Do you believe a man can change, sir?
Where is this heading?
I guess I don't know. I've tried to be a good hand. I've worked hard to secure your property.
And for that, we are grateful.
And you've paid me well besides. The thing is, I suppose, I need to get a place of my own, so I can prove to my wife that I've changed.
I understand.
But I ain't got much money. I ain't asking to borrow none. But maybe you could go to the bank and put in a good word so they could give me a loan?
A loan, huh?
So I can buy that place, Beecher's Hope?
Yes, I know it. Yes, of course, sure. It'd be my pleasure. Just make sure you deal with Ansel Atherton at the bank. He's a distant cousin. Here's my name. Tell him to ask me direct himself. You'll get what you need.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I was young and dumb once, too. You'll get her back.
Notice how excited he is for that. This is a man who once didn't give a shit about family, who actively ran away from it, who's now working his butt off to earn back the right to be in their life. And not just to convince them that he's changed, but to show them he has, to prove it. A true, honest-to-God redemption. Despite John technically being at a low point in his life, it still feels like a triumphant high point. He's not running someone else's errands or tending to someone else's livestock. This is the first time he really sets out to build something brand new from scratch by himself that he can really be proud of to give to Abigail and Jack. And getting to be a part of each step he takes to fulfill that goal is easily the strongest and most satisfying part of the epilogue. But not far behind it, and an aspect I think is a little underappreciated, is the clever reintroduction of the Vanderlyn gang members, those being Uncle, Sadie Adler, and Charles Smith. Uncle was always a character who was going to reappear at some point given his presence in the story of RDR 1, but Sadie and Charles are brilliant characters to be reintroduced. And not just for the fact that they happen to be fan favourites, but both of them were critically important in Arthur's own redemption, being sort of like moral tugboats guiding Arthur into port, the sort of goalposts for him to stay between. And their re-emergence in the epilogue gives John the opportunity for the same kind of moral guidance and support, especially at this particularly transformative and pivotal time in John's life. And I think it's symbolic of the fact that Arthur has passed on the same opportunity for John to redeem himself. The other reason I think these characters are included is to demonstrate John's commitment to his new life by resisting the pull of his old one. Because despite Uncle, Sadie, and Charles being reasonably moral people, it's not like we meet them under particularly moral or desirable circumstances. We first encounter Sadie in Valentine, who is, as always, an absolute battle axe, but she presents him with a difficult and complicated dilemma.
Hey, you any interest in bounties?
No, I've gone straight.
Huh?
Sort of.
Huh. Oh, it's legal, usually.
Then, maybe.
Bounty hunting as a profession essentially amounts to government-sanctioned murder and kidnapping, so it's hard to consider it as an honest living, but John, having spent most of his life as an outlaw, means he's almost perfectly equipped to handle this kind of a job, and doesn't really have any other means of making money now that he's no longer working for Mr. Geddes. And it is technically legal work. So it's in this strange sort of grey area where it's not entirely clear whether it counts as staying on the straight and narrow. It's certainly not something he'd be proud to tell Abigail he's been doing, which is why it certainly doesn't feel right, but I can't really articulate why. Maybe you guys have a better answer for this. But I think it's for that reason that bounty hunting missions make for a really interesting inclusion at this stage in John's story. As for the other two characters, John runs into Uncle outside the bank in Blackwater, who is clearly a vagrant with absolutely nothing happening in his life given how quickly he latches onto John. And the two of them find Charles involved in a criminal bare-knuckle boxing ring in St. Denis. The point is that neither of these men have really made anything at all of themselves since the fall of the Vanderlyn gang, and sort of represent what John could potentially regress into if he isn't able to change. But despite being surrounded by the remnants of his old life and the temptations that come with that, he doesn't at all allow himself to get dragged back into it. In fact, on the contrary, it's his commitment to his new one that lifts up Uncle and Charles out of the less than desirable situations they'd found themselves in. Their lives improve significantly just by being a part of John's. I mentioned before that violence begets violence, but I also think that's true in a much broader context, that activity of any kind usually leads to the same kind of activity. Kindness begets kindness, selflessness begets selflessness, etc. And I think that's one of the underlying messages of the entire Red Dead Redemption 2 story. The way you behave and the choices you make can be infectious and directly influence the people around you in a positive or negative way. Charles goes from beating the piss out of people for money in St. Denis to being so enamored by John's commitment to his family that he ends up wanting to start one of his own. And Uncle, as sour and sarcastic as he can often be, I still think is made to be a better person while in John's company. And I think John being surrounded by old friends makes his transformation of Beecher's hope mean a whole lot more given he's actually got people around him to share it with. Speaking of which, Beecher's hope, John's grand plan to win back his family, starts with him obtaining the bank loan and the deed to purchase the property.
What do you think?
Why exactly did you buy this dump?
Which, yes, it's so pathetic to the point that it's kind of sweet that John is proud of it at all. But it's more about what the property actually represents than the physical property itself. After a lifetime on the run as an outlaw, never staying in one place long enough to call it home, he's finally got one that he can. So why does he give a shit that it looks like a fucking outhouse? It's home, and that's what makes it special. But at the same time, look at it. It sucks. It's not even a shed, and Uncle makes a very good point.
Get some self-respect, you miserable sack of shit. Build a house a lady'd set foot in.
Place just needs a woman's touch.
It needs leveling. The house has gotta go.
After demolishing the house, John has to go and select the designs for a new one, collect the timber for it, and buy the tools to build it. The entire process of gradually transforming Beecher's hope into the ranch we recognise from the first game is slow and humble, which is what makes it feel all the more hard-earned and well-deserved. And its presentation couldn't be more charming if it tried. People clown on this part, and it's always bugged me a little bit that people do, because it's not really that long or tedious of a sequence, and the fact that it isn't just a cutscene, that we are actively interacting with the montage to lay the foundation, to hammer the nails. That little detail makes the whole sequence just that little bit more meaningful to us than it would have been if we had just sat there and watched it. But I think the reason that this sequence is so effective is because of the meaning behind it, building something stable and permanent with his own hands. And in doing that, the ranch becomes a symbol of everything John has worked so hard for, a literal physical expression of his love and dedication to his family. And that's the reason his redemption is so effective, is because you can see it, you can touch it, it's a thing. And now he's built it, there's only one thing left to do.
My darling Abigail, I hope you and Jack are doing well. I remain a fool, and I'm sure I shall die a fool. But I'm trying very hard to be something like the man you deserve. I have done something very silly in an effort to impress you. And that is, I've purchased a home. The land you read about in the newspaper up at Beecher's Hope is now ours, and we are going to try our hand at ranching. Mr. Geddes kindly helped me buy the land. I met Uncle while I was coming out of the bank, and while I know your feelings about him, he has been enormously helpful in his own fashion. Charles Smith has also appeared and is unsurprisingly a pillar of strength. Together, we've built you a home. I hope soon to show it to you. I miss you and the boy more than I can express. Please, come back to me. Yours always, John.
What the hell?
You're...
You always did have that fine way with words.
You doing all right, son?
Sure, Pop. Can I go see the house?
Sure.
Just give him some time. He'll warm up. It's quite a place you got here.
It's yours.
Ours. I should see about that boy.
Who's my new rival?
Oh, that's Rufus. He's loyal, dumb, and angry, so he reminded us of you.
That's your idea of a joke, miss?
I guess.
Come on!
Seeing everything come full circle and all of John's efforts finally get realised, it feels like a long-awaited reward. And as I said earlier, none of it's just about convincing Abigail that he's changed, but showing it. His behaviour and sort of the way he carries himself after they come back is distinctly different than it was at the start of the epilogue. And he's still not perfect, he's not smooth all of a sudden, and still sometimes can be a little blunt, but it's the consistency of his effort to be a better husband and a better father that makes him so endearing. The simple detail that he takes Jack fishing really shines a light on how much he's changed since the start of the game, when Arthur had to step in to do it for him. He's no longer absent and can start finally building a relationship with Jack. Jack. But I think the star of the show is when John and Abigail take a ride into Blackwater for a day out together.
I'm gonna head to the Drapers for a minute. Won't take long, but I need to get some materials. You wanna come with me or wait here?
And after that, we can go get our photo taken?
Yeah, after that we can get our photo taken. All right, let's get that picture taken. It means that much to you.
It does. Today it does.
The excitement John has for what he's about to do is undeniably infectious and sweet, and it's because of the fact that up to this point, much like Arthur, he's been a pretty stoic character and rarely externalizes these kinds of feelings. And I love that little detail of John pulling out the picture of Arthur and Mary, never losing sight of who gave him the ring and the second chance to use it. John and Abigail get their portrait taken, they go to the theatre, and then they decide to take a wander down to the lake before they head back to Beecher's Hope.
Will you... Will you marry me?
Get up, I am married to you.
No, I mean proper. In front of God.
You serious?
I got this ring. I've had it for a long time. Take it.
You serious?
It would make me very happy if you would...
We've lived a lot of lives.
Let's just live this one from now on. You and me, Jack, a family, by law.
John, I didn't know it mattered to you.
It didn't. But now it does. If you think this is dumb, I'm sorry.
Shut up, you silly man, and kiss me.
When I said up top that the epilogue ties up the story in such a satisfying way that it might make it the best part of the entire game, this is the part I was referring to. The scene on the train station with Arthur and Sister Calderon remains my favourite one in the game, but my god if this one isn't right there with it. Love stories, out of any storytelling genre that you can name, are among some of the hardest to pull off well. Or at least, I often find it hard to enjoy them. There's frequently an over-reliance on the will they, won't they dynamic, and the ones that don't do that usually come across to me as sappy or melodramatic. I find myself rolling my eyes far more often than I am actually investing in their story. But after seeing this one, I get it. I get why so many writers try to capture this kind of magic, because if you nail it, it's pretty undeniable. Controversial take, the game should have ended right here. But there's one last thing I think we as the players need almost more than John does, and that's closure. As I've reiterated a number of times throughout this video, John feels he owes a tremendous amount of gratitude and debt to Arthur for everything he now has. But being that Arthur's gone, there aren't that many ways in which John feels he can repay him, but here presents a chance to do just that. Micah Bell was the man responsible for much of the gang's downfall and possesses zero redeeming qualities or accolades to his name.
How's that, whore of yours?
Micah is the repulsive character who we love to hate, and if we didn't get a chance to kill this sleazy asshole, the community would have lost its mind. So I understand why this mission is necessary. Micah's betrayal of the Vandaling gang and the role he played in Arthur's death is very personal for John. Taking down Micah would be in John's way, at least in some sense, of getting justice for the downfall of the gang, and more importantly for Arthur. And John wearing Arthur's hat in this scene is a nice touch that underscores the showdown with that idea.
Hello, son. Mrs. Adler. It's been quite a while.
I mean, what a twist. Dutch's motivation for being here, as is always with him, a little unclear, but he does drop this little hint.
What are you doing here, Dutch? Same as you, I suppose.
After a tense standoff, Dutch comes to his senses and affords us the opportunity to do the one thing we've wanted to do since the very first chapter.
You shot me. You shot me pretty good.
And just like that, all the loose ends throughout the entire game are neatly tied up. Dutch walks away without saying a word, and now the stage is set for the events of Red Dead 1. What makes the epilogue so good, in my opinion, is probably the same reason it rubs some people the wrong way. Tonally, it's really quite different from the previous 6 chapters. It's significantly more charming and whimsical and hopeful in the way that the main game just isn't. It's a slow burn that banks entirely on your investment in this character and this story. But despite that, I don't think it ever loses sight of this one, contrary to what some people might tell you. While John Marston's story of redemption is very much secondary to Arthur's in Red Dead Redemption 2, that doesn't mean it's any less brilliantly executed. Seeing John evolve from a scumbag criminal who would abandon his family into a kinder, gentler, family-orientated man, that will always be an incredibly moving and uplifting story. And yet the epilogue continually gets underappreciated and infrequently talked about, despite being, in my opinion, one of the game's strongest sequences. I know that the title of this video is kind of a blazingly hot take, but the point that I'm trying to make is that the epilogue is more than good enough that I don't think it's insane for someone to think that it's the best part of Red Dead Redemption 2.
I can't stay no more. Come and lay by my side right here. Red, I need you in the world.